All right, let's get straight into it with my economics panel. Tonight, joining me from Melbourne is the Herald Sun's Terry McCrann, in Sydney, the Australian's economic editor, Adam Creighton. All right, Adam, you're in the hot seat. Talk to me about the next 6 weeks out of Victoria, what that will do for the national economy in terms of recovery from this virus.
Well, look, certainly the unemployment rate nationally is going to be much higher than that was forecast in the recent budget updates. Of course, the cost of GDP is going to be far greater. I think Commonwealth Bank has said it's going to be $12 billion extra cost over 6 weeks. So, all of these kind of economic aggregates, they're kind of meaningless. I think in the point, at the end of the day, it's, what it means for actual people, and it means for thousands of business closures, basically thousands of additional business closures, thousands of people out of work, and all the heartache that goes with that. I mean, I think it's a devastating outcome what's happened. It's very tragic, and I really wish it hadn't have happened.
I tell you what, you'll get sacked from the economics profession for having a heart there, Adam Creighton. You guys are usually hardcore on the numbers. Terry, I want to ask you about the ineligibility of some of these Victorian companies for JobKeeper. The way it was structured, a whole lot of businesses will not be eligible, but of course the government in Victoria has sent them all into this stage 4 lockdown, and we know with a company like Wesfarmers, they employ 25,000 workers across Bunnings, Officeworks, Kmart and Target. They're not eligible, so what happens to all these workers come midnight tonight?
Well, the obvious thing is, Peter, if they're not eligible for JobKeeper and Wesfarmers can't employ them sensibly, rationally, they'll go on to JobSeeker, which is a much lower payment, about half what a little more than half at the moment, the JobKeeper. But this whole construct of JobKeeper and JobSeeker was based on the assumption that all of Australia was in it pretty much at the same level. Now we've suddenly got one state which through its own negligence has made a terrible situation for that state and for businesses in that state, and we can't adjust in my judgment, we can't adjust JobKeeper to accommodate the stupidity that's taken place in Victoria. That JobKeeper should apply to in the same basis that it's applied up till now on a national basis.
Yeah, but the problem, just Terry, if I can stay there, the problem with this is if they're stood down for, let's say it's 6 weeks, I think it'll be longer. If they're stood down for 6 weeks, they haven't lost their job, but they haven't got a leave entitlement either, and they're not necessarily being paid. They can't then go and get the dole because they're not unemployed in technical terms. What do they do for 6 weeks?
No, I think that the reality, Peter, is they must be able to access JobSeeker. That should be a no-brainer. Which is not obviously at a level that JobKeeper is. But we have to, the basic point that Adam in particular and I've been arguing is that we have to get back to some sense of normality. We can't just assume that every time there's a stuff-up, or in fact the virus just continues whether or not there's a stuff-up, we'll write out a bigger cheque in Canberra. We've got to force both state governments and people out there generally to accept the reality that maybe we have to live with this virus both in a health basis and on an economic basis.
Well, the risk is that this becomes a model. Yes, the risk is, Adam, I'll come to your article today on New Zealand. The risk is that this will become the model for every other state should they get into rocky territory. Adam?
Exactly.
Yeah, look, I just briefly wanted to say the impact from the business side. I think one of the consequences of this is that the smaller businesses obviously will fail and the larger businesses will survive. And of course, in the long term, that's going to have big consequences, if you like, on competition and pricing power. You're going to move to an economy basically where you have far more larger businesses charging people more money and there's far less competition. I mean, I realise that this is an issue that we're not going to face for a few years, but I think it's a very important one because all of those small businesses, they won't be there to keep a check on the big businesses anymore.
And just quickly, we haven't got a plan. I can't see what we're pitching for, what success looks like in Victoria on the other side of this lockdown. You wrote about New Zealand today. Do you have any clarity about what we're actually driving at?
No, look, I think there's not. I think governments are obviously hoping for a vaccine, but actually from talking to some very informed people today, they basically said it's very unlikely we'll have a vaccine functioning within 12 months. And it's also worth making the point, even if there is a vaccine, the side effects of the vaccine might be so bad that people don't want to take it. So does that mean the government forces people to take the vaccine? I mean, it raises a whole host of questions, and I think it's, it would seem to me, kind of on the balance of probabilities, there's less than 50% chance of a vaccine within 12 to 18 months. And so therefore, why are we shutting down the economy to such an extreme extent? It would make sense to try to live with the virus. Of course, people talk about New Zealand, but look, it's a very remote island. I mean, of all the countries in the world that could have dealt with it, it was New Zealand. So I think it's not a realistic benchmark. And of course, they can't leave their own country. That's hardly a victory in my view.
Got to leave it there. Terry McCrann, stay safe, Terry McCrann. You're in Melbourne with me. And Adam Creighton, as always, thank you for your time.